All right, and we are back with HOA SOS, another SOS issue that our clients are having to deal with, and others in the HOA industry, is a bulletin that the Department of Regulatory Agencies, DORA, issued, making certain recommendations to comply with the governor's recommendations as to foreclosures and collection of money by landlords and others in those type of fields.
Right. So with HOAs, we're talking about a recommendation regarding people's normal monthly or quarterly assessments, their HOA dues that they pay, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And what DORA recommended was that the associations cease collection activity, cease foreclosure cases right now.
And that means foreclosing on an assessment lien, correct?
Correct. Okay. Foreclosing on an assessment lien to take the ownership or be able to sell
right.
To force the sale of somebody's unit in which they're either living or others are living. And so the recommendations went on to basically say associations need to be reasonable with regard to their handling of requests by owners for abatement of their common assessments.
I'm assuming this is going to open a floodgate of concerned questions and what to do's.
And it's already opened a floodgate to homeowners that receive the DORA bulletin to make immediate requests to associations for such a reprieve.
Which you and I ran into yesterday, March 24th, right after out of the gate. I don't think the bulletin had even been out there an hour.
Right.
And we already had a situation.
And associations are run by owners in the community that are voluntary board members.
Yeah. Last I heard, that job doesn't pay a whole lot.
No, doesn't. It shouldn't pay anything.
Right.
But these board member owners are going through the same issues that everybody else is. They're either being forced to stay at home, or their residents are being forced to stay at home. They may be landlords that aren't getting paid or being asked to forgive rent as a result of the loss of a job by their tenants.
Well, there's no doubt that this is a crisis. I mean, come on, we're in an epic, unprecedented state in this country. But you and I think, fair to say, this topic kept us up last night. We talked about it a lot. We have some preliminary thoughts about it. Fair to say? Fair to say.
Here, associations do have to be compassionate and be reasonable. An association's board, the board members have certain fiduciary duties they have to comply with. They have to act in good faith. They have to act in a reasonable manner in that others in a similar position would act, and they have to act in the best interests of the association itself. But juggling those duties is difficult, and it makes it even more difficult in a time of need for not only the individual owners, but for the associations themselves. Associations are dealing with homeowners and residents that are now having to live and enjoy their community much more than they have in the past. They're stuck there. They're going to be dealing with additional maintenance issues, additional legal issues, additional neighbor complaints, those type of things. And so all of that does take money, and the only way an association can operate is through the money that it collects from its assessments.
Yeah, understood. And as you know, I had a pretty strong reaction to it that was a little bit of a two-sided coin. On one side of the coin, I absolutely get the impetus behind the bulletin. I mean, I would tell anybody in any industry that's dealing with people, you got to act out of compassion right now. And I think we're seeing the best in people, but we're also, maybe if we're honest, seeing some of the worst. But the flip side of the coin, the problem I had with it, as you know, I've dealt with fair housing work in my profession for many years. It's just the counterpart to being an employment attorney. One of the issues that we regularly advise our clients on is how to avoid fair housing issues. And I'll just be blunt. My input to associations would be immediately get a hold of your general counsel, who you regularly deal with, to figure out how you're going to respond to this bulletin. The recommendation was kind of, in my mind, unless I misread it somehow, take these things on a case-by-case basis, right? You know, hear people out. But the problem I have with that is you got to be careful with that. If Happy Acres Association is trying to do that with one owner, it could really look different 4 months from now when 25 other owners come forward. Now they're Grumpy Acres. They got a bunch of different situations. You don't want to get into a situation where you treated one owner one way and another owner very differently, because then you could have a discrimination issue. So we've talked a little bit about, you know, what we would tell people to at least have a conversation with if they're on their boards with their general counsel. And the first thing I said, I think the better move is ask your general counsel to try to create a short-term policy on how to deal with this, so that you create an objective criteria about, first, are you really going to do an abatement on dues, or maybe waive soft costs like interest, late fees for a while, make payment plans. But my thought is you got to start with one set policy with an objective criteria that applies to A, your wage earners in the community, and then B, your self-employed people, and what are you going to put in place to grant whatever it is you're going to grant. Do you have any thoughts on that,
Yeah,
Lee?
and when you talk about a case-by-case basis, here, people are getting let off because businesses are not able to function, and
Correct.
that individuals are saying that they are being laid off because of COVID-19, and that it's just a unique situation. But it doesn't make it necessarily a unique situation under fair housing, because a year from now,
Exactly.
if an individual comes down with some disease and is let go for it, or gets ill, or just is let go for some other financial or economic reason, that they're going to, or may have an argument that it's similar, they're similarly situated to what is happening to individuals today.
Exactly. That term you just used, similarly situated, is the key buzzword when we deal with civil rights of any kind: fair housing, employment, public accommodations. So if I live next door to you and you got this treatment right now because you were laid off due to a furlough, and a year from now I work for CenturyLink, I get laid off, how is it that difference? That's why I think you got to have a policy in place that's for a short term, that has an objective criteria. And the first thing you got to figure out is, what are you going to grant? What can you grant? To your point, how will it impact the overall budget of the community? This could really affect some communities whose budget's low, and then they have to go into their reserve to meet their monthly needs.
Yeah. And associations should look at things from a large-scale perspective and work their way
Absolutely.
down. Right now, there are certain budgeted items that need to go forward, such as certain maintenance, emergency maintenance, etc. And we'll talk more about that in the next segment. But the association should look at its budget, see what can be put off until later in the year, or push to the next year's cycle, and figure out if they can globally, for all owners, cut assessments back right now. That way it's equitable among the owners in the community. while still being able to perform the necessary functions and reasonable functions that they have to, and then get to the individual requests based on what you're recommending.
Yeah, I like that, and I think we're kind of saying the same thing. Let's just look at it in steps really quick before we wrap this up. Step one, figure out what your community can do, what that's going to look like, and is it A, are you going to just, waive dues that are monthly for a short period of time, or B, are you just going to suspend soft costs, or C, make payment arrangements? And then I think step two is set that objective criteria. Who qualifies? And talk about it with your general counsel. The thoughts I would give anybody that asks me about it is say, okay, if we have somebody who's making that request, who is a wage earner, they get a W-2, they're not a 1099 self-employed person, what documentation do you need from them? Have they applied for unemployment? You need to talk about what it is that you're going to require, something showing they got laid off or they're going to be without income, and are they the main breadwinner? Is somebody else in their household on title to the property, earning money, those things, versus if they're self-employed. Maybe they own a restaurant and they're shut down and applying for business interruption proceeds but may not get them. What documentation do you want? Those are just my thoughts on the conversation board members should be having with their regular general counsel on creating a policy and put it in place, maybe make it parallel to the FFCRA. It ends December 31st. I don't know. Attorneys are going to have to get creative with this and work closely with their boards.
And if you don't have a separate emergency policy like we're talking about, associations do have are supposed to have a collection policy that follows statute.
Absolutely.
Take a look at the collection policy. Associations generally have a right to enter into a payment plan with an owner. Just make sure that it isn't going to be something that either will harm the association economically or is going to put the homeowner so far behind that it's not a benefit to the homeowner down the road.
All right. So to sum it up, I think what we really advocate is definitely compassion for the entire community, compassion for owners that are going through really hard times, but get a policy and be consistent and even-handed, just like everything else that boards are charged to do to meet their fiduciary obligations.
And if you have any questions concerning this topic, please feel free to contact Wes or me at L. Freedman or W. Wollenweber at pwflegal.com.
Absolutely.
Or 720-400-7123.
We're going to take a break and come back with one more installment regarding these tough times.